KLM and Air France are two of the best rated airlines in Europe, so today I'm going to be taking two flights and showing you everything that you need to know in order to find out which is the best and which is the worst. But I was not prepared for how things were about to go. Up first today, I'm going to be flying on KLM, which is the direct rival to Air France, so it's going to be super interesting to see how they compare. But since I'm already at the airport, I think it's time to head inside to check in and grab our boarding pass. Now that I was inside, I needed to find a kiosk for check-in because of a slight issue that I'll tell you about in a minute. After getting to the kiosk, I agreed to having nothing dangerous, scanned my passport, punched in my final destination, and I was able to get my boarding pass in no time at all. So thankfully that check-in process went super smooth, and on top of that I also have a window seat, which is awesome, but now we have a slight issue. And that's because I have a carry-on, a garment bag, and also I'm wearing a backpack. And on some airlines, they will actually consider the garment bag an extra personal item or carry-on and charge you, but it looks like we're gonna have to wait and find out, because up first I think it's time to head through security, because on the other side apparently there's a really cool lounge, so we are definitely gonna be checking that out. Now thankfully for me, security was close by, and surprisingly I was able to get through in no time at all. So if you've been watching my videos for a while now, you know that European security is my absolute favorite. Pretty much every single time it is super quick, I never get double inspected, and that was also the case this time around, which is unreal. But now that I am through security, it's time to make my way to the lounge for today, which was going to be the Plaza Premium Lounge. Making my way inside, there was plenty of room for seating with views overlooking some of the planes down below. But now, how was the food situation? Well, for this, there was bread, cheese, a salad bar, an area for different soups and snacks, tons of different British style dishes to choose from, including desserts. And since the Brits love their booze, you could guarantee that there was going to be a bar in here along with unlimited soft drinks. So I decided to load up with a glass of wine. All right, so overall I'd have to say the lounge was mediocre at best. It was super modern, which was nice. The staff were really friendly. There was a bar, which is always a plus. But when it came to the food, the choices were very strange. And on top of that, there wasn't much variety. But overall, I'd still give it a solid 8 out of 10. But now there's only about 15 minutes left until my flight is actually supposed to board, so I thought I'd take this time to tell you guys a little bit more about KLM, just in case you have never flown them before or have never even heard of them. Right off the bat, KLM is a 3.5-star airline, and the vast majority of reviews are excellent or very good. Passengers say their cabin crew is some of the best in the sky, that they had wonderful experiences, and that they're an excellent airline. But on the flip side, people say it was their first and last time flying KLM, that they can be unreliable with fluctuating prices, and one person even complained about having to sit beside a cracked window with tape on it. So now for the vast majority, the reviews are overwhelmingly positive, even though there's 2 or 3 bad ones as well. But I think it's time to head to the gate to see what KLM is actually like for ourselves. And remember, after this, I'm going to be flying Air France to see which of the two is actually better. And lucky for me, it appeared that the flight was still right on time, with boarding set to begin any minute now. And now it's time to see if we get in trouble for bringing all this luggage. I think I'm gonna be fine, but let's wait and see. Hi there, how's it going?
Thank you.
Good shit, thank you. Time for flight number 1 on KLM. Hi there.
Hi, welcome.
How are you? Making my way through the cabin, this plane was in your typical 3x3 seating layout, and after getting near the back, I arrived at my seat, where I was happy to find plenty of room in the overhead for storing my luggage, and there was also a solid amount under the seat too, which is rare when you're sat by the window. Alright, so some initial thoughts. Right off the bat, doing the comfort test, the seat is actually pretty comfy. The butt cushion, back cushion, and headrest are all really good, and on top of that, the headrest goes up and down, which is awesome. Now, you probably remember me stressing out in the terminal, not being sure if I was able to bring my garment bag or not. Thankfully, there were no issues with it whatsoever. And now that I know that airlines allow you to bring garment bags, you may as well just bring one whenever you travel. You could literally fill that thing to the brim. I have shoes in there, outfits in there that aren't even my suit, and it's basically another carry-on. And if you're gonna do this, just know that you might still get caught. Anyways, the next thing that I noticed is that since this is such a short flight, there isn't going to be a TV, but I was happy to find a USB port for charging devices, and also a place where I could put my phone and drink, which is always cool to see. Right next to this, I found the instructions for connecting to the Wi-Fi, which we'll need to do once we're in the air. I found a place where I could hang things up, and it was also nice to see that I had 2 windows at my seat instead of just 1. Another thing too is for an economy class seat, the legroom is actually really good. I'm only 5'8", and normally my knees are touching the back of the seat, but this one's pretty solid, and pretty much the only downside that I could think of is the recline isn't very much. Now at this point, I was checking out the last few things that I could think of while still being on the ground, like the air conditioning and reading lamp, the cool colored seat belts, and I also noticed how the floor was a bit dirty. But then I realized that we had been sitting here for a while and we still haven't began pushing back from the gate. So a tiny bit of bad news. The pilot just came on the overhead and said we are delayed by just a couple minutes. It's nothing too serious, it's only about 5 minutes I think there's some final little things that they had to do. And apparently we're still supposed to be landing on time, so it's really not that big of an issue. But the thing with airlines is you never know, sometimes 5 minutes can turn into an hour, so hopefully we end up leaving soon. And lucky for me, today there wasn't going to be any additional delays, and soon enough we began pushing back from the gate. For the first flight of the day, I was going to be flying roughly an hour from London to Amsterdam, and after getting to the runway, it was time for takeoff. So this has never happened to me on a flight before, but I think I just got called out by the flight attendants. So basically on the ground before a flight, they do a whole walk through the aisles and make sure everything's good, right? I'm pretty sure when they were walking by me, they saw my camera, because during the safety instructions, they said, keep in mind if you are filming or taking photos to not film or photograph the crew or passengers for their privacy. And seeing that I'm the only one on board with a camera filming, it was the most passive-aggressive shot at me. Now obviously that is totally okay and reasonable. I wish the crew would have asked me a little bit more nicely instead of being passive-aggressive, but I'll still respect their wishes. Anyways, let's explore some more. Located on the seat in front of me, I was happy to find that there was a pretty solid pouch for storing things, which came with a KLM branded waist bag, and in the cubby at the top of the seat, there was also a safety pamphlet, which is important since this is a Boeing. And there was also a magazine, which had the entire KLM fleet and all of the different destinations that they fly to. Now that I was in the air, I was able to finally connect to the Wi-Fi, which had free messaging, but if you wanted to surf the internet, that would be 8 euros, and to stream movies, it would be 12, which is a bit pricey if you ask me. But anyways, since this was a shorter flight, this means that the meal service had begun, so I took out my tray table, which happened to be a solid size, before being served with water and a bag of chips. Now, since this is such a short flight, we're actually already halfway through, so I thought I'd share my thoughts on it so far. Right off the bat, these seats are really good. The butt cushion, back cushion, and headrest are all incredibly comfortable. Now, obviously, since this is a short flight, it's impossible to tell how this seat would feel after 1 or 2 hours, maybe even 3. But for this flight in particular, pretty solid. Now, besides the flight attendants passive-aggressively calling me out earlier, they are all extremely friendly. During the meal service, they were super social with everyone, and that's always good to see. And speaking of the meal service, it was pretty decent. On some airlines, they won't even give you a snack or water, but on KLM, they gave you some chips and also water, which is always nice. So overall, things are pretty solid so far. Now, after this flight, I'm going to be flying on Air France, but I forgot to mention that Air France and KLM are actually owned by the same company. So I'm really curious to see the differences or if they're going to be very identical, but there's still a few other things to check out, and then it's finally going to be time for that flight. So since we were going to be landing soon, let's see what the bathroom on this plane was really like. Making my way inside, it was definitely on the smaller side, but all things considered, it was pretty clean with a solid amount of headroom. But after making it back to my seat, we had begun our descent into Amsterdam. So now that we were landing, it's time for the next flight on Air France. So now overall, the flight on KLM was actually pretty solid, minus the fact that they were kind of passive-aggressive towards me. But now that we're all done on them, it's time to fly at Air France, and I have never flown on them before, so I genuinely have no idea what to expect. But since I'm back at the airport, it's time to head inside to check in and grab our boarding pass. Now that I was back in the airport, I needed to find the Air France check-in, only there wasn't one, until I realized that KLM and Air France shared the exact same one since they're partners. After figuring that out, all I needed to do was put in my booking code and print out my boarding pass, but now we needed to see if Air France will end up charging me for my extra baggage. Honestly, I was walking around the airport for a good 10 minutes trying to find the check-in because I thought Air France had their own, but it makes sense that it's with KLM. Once I finally got there, it went super smooth, and luckily I'm actually in a window seat, which is awesome. But now that I do have the boarding pass, it's time to head through security, and then on the other side there's a pretty cool lounge to check out. So after scanning my boarding pass at the gate, I made my way through security, which wasn't the best experience to say the least. Normally when I travel in Europe, I literally have the best of luck with security, but this time around, not so much. Normally it's just one bag that they'll search, but this time around they searched all 3 of my bags. And then on top of that, they gave me a pat down too. So I'm definitely gonna have to add a point to the tally for that. But anyways, now that I am through security, I think it's time to check out that lounge. And then after, it's finally gonna be time to see what Air France is actually like. And for today, the second lounge we'll be exploring is the Aspire. Making my way inside, this lounge was absolutely massive and also super modern with private areas to sit and work, but there was even an outdoor terrace too. So now, how was the food? Well, sadly, the selection was quite poor, only consisting of soups, breads, lunch meats, cheese, a salad bar, and some small desserts, but there was a ton of different drinks, so I decided to grab myself a little bit of everything. So now overall, I'd have to say the lounge was
was pretty decent. It was super big and super modern, which is awesome. It had views overlooking the runway and outside, which is always super pretty. The staff were extremely friendly. There was tons of seating area, which is always awesome. But pretty much my only complaint is there was a very limited selection of food, but even though it was limited, it was still really good. So overall, I'd have to give it an 8.5 out of 10. But anyways, there's now only about 10 minutes left until my flight is actually supposed to board. So I thought I'd take this time to tell you guys a little bit more about Air France, just so we know what customers actually think of them.
Similar to KLM, Air France is rated 3.5 stars, but they don't have any awards. And when it comes to the reviews, they're much more spread out. On one side, people say to never book with Air France. The seats barely have any legroom and that the airline is unreliable and unethical. But on the flip side, people rave about fantastic staff, saying that they would fly them again, and overall it was a fantastic experience.
But now obviously the reviews are one thing, and usually my personal experience tends to be completely different. So I think it's time to finally head to the gate to see how Air France actually compares to KLM.
And lucky for me, I didn't have to walk very far in order to find my gate, and just as I got there, my flight for today was pulling in.
So far it seems that we are right on time. Looks like we're off to a pretty good start. But again, the flight is what actually matters.
And then, just as I said that, things weren't off to a good start.
I really shouldn't have said anything because they just announced on the overhead that the flight's actually been delayed by 15 minutes. Apparently the cleaning process is taking longer than expected, but we are supposed to be landing at the exact same time, so at least that is a positive.
Now normally during a delay, I'd take the time to dig through my bag, find the pin to pop open my SIM card slot, and put my old SIM card into my bag so I could pick up a new one after landing. But that was until I found Olafly and their eSIM cards. While I was waiting for boarding to begin, I downloaded their app, browsed through the options, and picked the one that I needed. And the best part is that they offer coverage in 32 countries across Europe with unlimited data. And you can also pick plans from 1 to 90 days or exactly how many you are going to need. But to make things even better, you could do this all while waiting at the airport, and you don't need to worry about potentially losing your primary SIM card in your bag. Using the link down in the description, you can purchase your Olafly eSIM today, or you could download their app to do it later. And with the Olympics coming up in Paris, both European and France eSIMs cost the exact same. But anyways, it was now finally time to board the Air France flight.
Time to see what Air France is actually like. There.
Making my way through the cabin, this flight was in a 3x3 just like on KLM, and eventually I made it to my seat for today's flight. Checking out the overhead, there was a pretty decent amount of space for bags, and under the seat, things were extremely clean with a pretty solid amount of room as well, which is always nice.
Alright, so some initial thoughts. Right off the bat, this plane is definitely a lot older than the one I was on earlier with KLM. As for the seats, they are pretty comfortable, pretty comparable if I'm being honest. The butt cushion, back cushion, and headrest are all pretty solid, but the biggest difference between the two is the legroom. Being only 5'8", this one is way tighter than the KLM Flight, which would obviously suck if you are way taller than I am. And overall, things just feel a little bit more cramped. But again, these are just my initial thoughts, and I just got on the plane, so there is still so much more that I need to explore.
Now, just like the previous flight, since we were only going to be flying a short distance, this plane also didn't have a TV, which is perfectly okay. When it came to the recline of the seat, this one was a bit better than KLM for sure. Located on the back of the tray table, it was cool to see a nice cup holder for drinks. There was a hanger for coats, working air conditioning, and reading lamps, but the only downside was that this seat only had one window, unlike the two on KLM.
So it turns out we're a little bit more delayed than originally thought. It is now 1:55, which is the original departure time, and we're still in the middle of the boarding process, which is a little bit of a disaster. Pretty much just people taking their time with the baggage and the overhead space and all of that. So hopefully we end up leaving soon.
And I'll be honest, this had to be one of the slowest boarding processes I've ever done, but eventually the door was closed and we began pushing back from the gate 20 minutes later than we should have departed. For today's second flight, I was going to be flying roughly an hour from Amsterdam down to Paris, and after getting to the runway, it was time for takeoff. Now, originally, I had something to say here, but me being an idiot, I forgot to turn on the mic, so I think we should check out the seat some more. Right in front of me, there was a large pouch for storing things and an Air France branded waist bag inside, along with the safety pamphlet, which we won't be needing since this isn't a Boeing flight. Just like the KLM flight, this one had Wi-Fi and it was super easy to connect, where messaging was free, surfing was only €5 instead of 8, but when it came to streaming, this one was even more expensive at €15 versus KLM's 12. But anyway, since this was a shorter flight, the meal service soon began, and I took out the large tray table only to find that things were extremely dirty, pretty much everywhere. But I was happy to see that I could get multiple drinks plus a sandwich, but now that I was done, it was time for the loo review. Similar to KLM, this bathroom was definitely on the smaller side, but it was extremely clean with everything that you would come to expect, while also having some decent headroom, and after that, I made my way back to my seat.
So now that I'm 3/4 of the way through the flight, I thought I'd go ahead and share my thoughts. I'll be completely honest here, the seat really didn't improve that much. Having it fully reclined for the entire flight did help a tiny bit, but like I said earlier, there is no reason why you should have to fully recline the seat for it to be comfy. Now when it comes to the seat, the only other downside is that the legroom is super tight. And another thing that I noticed too, especially during the meal service, is that the tray table and the area around it is just disgusting. But now speaking of the meal service, it was actually pretty solid. Unlike KLM where you just got a little snack, on this flight you actually got half a sandwich, which was surprisingly pretty decent. And unlike on KLM where you only got water, here you had the choice of soft drinks, coffee, and also water too, which is always nice when there's a bit of a variety. Now, one of the things that I did find kind of weird is it does use the same Wi-Fi between the two airlines, but for some reason on Air France it's more expensive for some of them. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but just something strange that I noticed. And now at this point, I'm sure you're probably wondering, what are my final thoughts and which of the two airlines do I think are actually better?
Well, when it came to the check-in process, both airlines were quite comparable. For boarding, both of the flights were delayed, so it's another tie there. When it came to the staff, both airlines were super nice and friendly, besides some passive aggressiveness on KLM. For the seats, I do have to say that KLM was comfier, but when it came to the meal service, Air France was the winner there. And if I really needed to pick one or the other, I'd have to say that KLM is better, purely because of the customer reviews having more 4 or 5-star ratings versus Air France. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and watch this one next where I flew Europe's worst rated airlines.